Commissioned just prior to the start of World War II, the USS Boise saw extensive action in multiple theaters, from the Far East to the Mediterranean, and was a tough ship with a dependable and efficient crew. Named in honor of the state capital of Idaho, she was the sixth member of the Brooklyn class to be built and survived the war, while earning 11 battle stars for her service. The Brooklyn class was the most modern class of U.S. cruisers upon the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, and would serve as the catalyst for all future gun-based cruiser designs. The class came to fruition during the early 1930s after the signing of the First London Naval Treaty. The U.S. Navy realized by this point that the Pacific Ocean was their next likely battleground and wanted a fleet of cruisers that could operate within its vast ranges. The previous classes of light cruisers were too small and not well suited for this role, but the heavy cruisers that were in the U.S. inventory at this time, particularly the New Orleans class, were more robust and were fairly capable ships. They had originally been considered light cruisers before the London Treaty was signed due to their thin armor, but once the ink on the treaty was dry, they were reclassified as heavy cruisers because of their 8-inch main batteries. This gave the designers a starting point, as they already knew the hull had appropriate space for fuel, and thus the range they were looking for. The new design was modified slightly, but it used a similar machinery and had comparable armor to the New Orleans class. They armed it with a 6-inch main battery which designated them as light cruisers under the treaty, essentially allowing the U.S. Navy to get the larger cruisers that they wanted without violating the treaty. As the particulars for the Japanese Mogami class of heavy cruisers became known, the U.S. sought to match their firepower with the addition of 6 more gun barrels to the design. Boise's keel was laid down on April 1, 1935, at the Newport News Shipbuilding Company in Newport News, Virginia, and she was launched on December 3, 1936. She came at a cost of $11.6 million to build, and when completed had an overall length of 608 feet and a beam of about 62 feet. She had a standard displacement of 9,700 tons and a full load displacement of 12,200 tons. Her main battery consisted of 15 6-inch 47 caliber, Mark 16 guns housed in 5 triple turrets, 3 forward of her superstructure and 2 aft. These weapons had an incredible rate of fire of up to 10 rounds a minute and gave the Boise, with a well-trained and efficient crew, the potential to send 150 rounds downrange in 1 minute, allowing her to smother and overwhelm an enemy ship quickly. Boise would demonstrate this in the waters surrounding Guadalcanal in late 1942, earning her the nickname of the machine gun cruiser. Her anti-aircraft battery at the time of her commissioning included 8 5-inch 25 caliber single mounts and 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns. By 1945, Boise had 4 quad and 2 twin mounts of 40mm Bofors guns and 18 20mm Oerlikon autocannons added to improve her air defense. Boise had a thin armor belt that was only 5 inches at its thickest point and 2 inches of deck armor, but this was fairly standard for U.S. cruisers of the period. She was powered by 4 geared turbines, each driving 1 shaft and using the steam provided by 8 oil-fired Babcock and Wilcox boilers. Rated for 100,000 shaft horsepower, Boise was capable of 32.5 knots and had a range of 10,000 nautical miles at 15 knots. Boise commissioned into the fleet on August 12, 1938, and her pre-war service was pretty standard, consisting of her shakedown cruise, followed by operations off the U.S. West Coast during 1940 and 1941. In mid-November 1941, she got underway to escort a convoy bound for the Philippine capital of Manila. She was off of Cebu Island in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. She then proceeded to patrol and escort convoys in the waters north of Australia into January, until striking an uncharted shoal on January 21st while escorting a convoy to East Java. This forced Boise to have to return stateside to the Mare Island Navy Yard for repairs. The silver lining to this was that this damage most likely saved her and her crew from the same fate that was incurred by other U.S. warships in the theater, like the USS Houston, during the battles throughout the following months. Her repairs were completed by mid-June, and she resumed convoy escort duty in the Pacific, until being dispatched in late July to conduct a solo raid deep into Japanese territory as a ruse to draw attention away from U.S. activities on Guadalcanal. Her job was to generate enough radio traffic to create the impression that a striking force was heading to the Japanese home islands. During August and September, Boise returned to escort duty and operated in the general vicinity of the Solomon and New Hebrides Islands. Boise, with her crew eager to scrap and prove themselves, would get into the surface action off of Guadalcanal during the Battle of Cape Esperance. Here, as part of Rear Admiral Norman Scott's Task Force 64, Boise would find herself in the thick of the action trying to derail the Tokyo Express. Just after 23:30 on the night of October 11th, her SC radar set painted a picture of the battle to come, showing the Japanese formation ahead to the northwest at 14,000 yards, with Task Force 64 in perfect position to cross the enemy's T. Miscommunications between Scott and some of his commanders caused the holdup of the task force's opening salvo, until Boise's sister Helena finally let it rip, and her 15 6-inch guns lashed out ferociously into the night. Boise's captain, Edward Mike Moran, or Iron Mike as he was known, shouted at his gunnery officer to pick out the biggest one and fire. As Boise's first salvo rang out into the night, her target was a mere 4,500 yards away, which is closer than point blank in a naval gunfight. Her first two salvos ravaged the Japanese heavy cruiser Aoba, and she poured it on until Aoba was a burning mess. Boise's rate of fire at this point was considerable and awe-inspiring. Within 4 minutes of opening fire, the light cruiser had sent out over 300 rounds from her main battery into the enemy force, and her own captain could not keep up with the action as it was happening. The Japanese would later refer to both Boise and Helena as the machine gun cruisers. Then Boise's luck would change, and she was struck by an 8-inch shell just above her waterline that ruptured her side plating, followed in quick succession by several smaller rounds. In the confusion of the battle, with his senses deteriorated by all the muzzle flashes, and his radar clouded by large shell splashes, along with the intermingling of both sides' ships, Captain Moran used his searchlights to eliminate an enemy ship, and Boise took multiple hits as a result. One struck her barbette underneath turret 1, crashing through a deck and exploding as the crew tried to get out through the turret's escape hatch. Another round hit the faceplate of turret number 3, showering the superstructure with shrapnel. Then a shell hit Boise 9 feet below her waterline and exploded in the forward 6-inch magazine, sending flames through the forward handling rooms and up through the forward turrets, putting all 3 turrets out of action. Luckily, she was spared from the catastrophic explosion that usually accompanies a magazine fire by the seawater that came rushing in through the hole in her hull caused by the shell hit. This flooded all of her forward hull spaces, including the magazine. During this time, her aft turrets kept banging away, and by the end of the night's fighting, Boise had fired over 800 rounds of 6-inch ordnance. Excellent damage control, combined with her boilers and engines being unharmed, saved Boise for another day and another fight. Boise limped away in the early morning hours of October 12th and made her way, along with the rest of the task force, to the fleet anchorage at Espiritu Santo. From here, she made her way to the Philadelphia Navy Yard for repairs and would be there until March 1943. Once repaired and ready for duty, she sailed for the Mediterranean to provide cover and fire support for the invasion of Sicily in July and August. She then covered the landings at Taranto and Salerno on the Italian mainland during September, before being recalled to New York for an overhaul in mid-November. Boise was then sent back to the Pacific Theater, arriving there in late December. For the next 9 months, Boise would operate exclusively along the northern shore of New Guinea, providing shore bombardment and fire support for various amphibious landings. She then moved on to the Philippines as the fighting did, where she participated in the Battle of Surigao Strait during the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf on October 25, 1944. Here, as part of Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's battle line, she would once again help cross the T of a Japanese surface force, but this time with a little extra help. Boise commenced firing when the battleships opened up and aided in the destruction of the Japanese battleship Yamashiro. Initially, she brought out her 1942 playbook and went into continuous fire mode like at Cape Esperance, before being ordered to fire slowly and deliberately to save ammunition. She would check her fire at 4:09 a.m. and her part in the battle was over. Boise provided shore bombardment and fire support for operations in the Philippines for the rest of the year and into mid-1945. In early June, she carried General Douglas MacArthur on a tour of the central and southern Philippines and Borneo before returning to San Pedro, California in July. She underwent an overhaul and sailed in early October for the East Coast, arriving in New York on October 20th. Boise remained there until she was decommissioned on July 1st, 1946. Boise was sold to the Argentina Navy in 1951 and remained in service there until 1978. She was broken up and scrapped in 1983 in Brownsville, Texas. Once again, a sad ending for a tough ship that fought gallantly. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so that we can bring you more insightful content just like this.